Welcome to the Depth Dive. We're so glad you are joining us today because we're looking at a text that is just as historically monumental as it is heavily debated.
Yeah, it really is.
Today we are exploring Sunan Ibn Majah. It's a 9th century Islamic text that serves as this somewhat controversial 6th pillar of the Sunni Hadith canon.
It is a text that forces us to ask some really difficult questions about how history is preserved.
Right.
When you examine the canon of early Islamic literature, this specific compilation stands out, because of the intense multi-layered debates it sparked, and not just recently. We are talking about debates that have gone on for over a millennium.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, our stack of sources is incredibly comprehensive. We're drawing on rigorous academic research, classical theological commentaries, and modern historical analyses.
We really wanted to get the full picture.
We did. Our mission today is to explore a profound paradox. How does a book that openly contains acknowledged weak and sometimes even fabricated traditions, how does that become a revered canonical text?
It's a great question.
We are going to examine the intense debates surrounding it, from Sunni, Shia, and secular perspectives. Okay, let's unpack this. Who exactly was Ibn Majah, and what was he trying to achieve in the 9th century?
Well, to really grasp the significance of the book, you kind of have to mentally place yourself in his era. We are looking at this text essentially as a masterclass in how early societies archived information well before the existence of centralized databases.
Right, way before the internet.
Exactly. So, Muhammad ibn Yazid ibn Majah was born in the year 209 AH, which is roughly 824 CE, in the city of Qazvin, Persia.
Okay.
At this time, the Islamic world was experiencing this absolute explosion of intellectual flourishing. Qazvin itself was a very vibrant hub of learning, and Ibn Majah immersed himself in the religious sciences from a very, very early age.
But he didn't just stay in his hometown studying local texts.
No, not at all.
He went on this epic 15-year journey across the Islamic world. And I think we should pause to think about what a 15-year data collection trip actually looked like back then.
Oh, it was grueling.
We are talking about traveling by camel or on foot from Khorasan to Baghdad, Damascus, Mecca, Medina, Egypt.
Yeah.
He was traversing deserts, relying on vast networks of oral transmitters, seeking out specific scholars just to verify single lines of transmission.
That physical toll is something modern readers often overlook. Gathering this data was dangerous work. And the result of that 15-year journey is the Sunan. The sheer scale of it is pretty impressive.
Give us the numbers.
We are talking about 4,341 hadiths, meticulously organized into 37 books and over 1,500 chapters.
Wow.
But the volume isn't what makes Ibn Majah unique. It is his underlying methodology. If you look at someone like Imam Bukhari,
Right.
his approach was to use a strict, incredibly rigorous filter. Bukhari's primary goal was absolute, unquestionable authenticity. If a chain of transmission had even a hint of doubt, Bukhari usually tossed it out. Ibn Majah, on the other hand, took a markedly different approach. He deliberately used a broad net.
I love the analogy of looking at Bukhari as this incredibly strict bouncer at the door of a very exclusive club, whereas Ibn Majah is more like an archivist trying to sweep everything into the library before it catches fire.
That's a great way to look at it.
But I have to ask, why? Why cast such a broad net? If you know it means letting in questionable material, doesn't that sort of defeat the purpose of a religious compilation?
It does if your only goal is theological purity. But Ibn Majah's primary goal was utility and legal comprehensiveness, specifically for fiqh or jurisprudence.
Okay, so making it useful for the law.
Exactly. He wanted to create a one-stop shop for jurists and legal scholars across the empire. He organized his book thematically, covering the mundane to the profound. Everything from marriage contracts and complex business transactions to etiquette and dream interpretation.
So a bit of everything.
Yeah, if a local judge in a far-flung province needed a legal precedent, Ibn Majah wanted to ensure they could find some kind of reference for it in his book.
And that focus on utility brings us to the Zawaid, or the unique additions. From my notes here, out of those thousands of hadiths, a massive chunk of them are completely unique to his compilation.
They are.
They aren't found in any of the other 5 major canonical books.
Roughly 320 of them, to be exact. And that is the very reason why, centuries later, scholars like al-Makrizi formally championed Sunan Ibn Majah to be included as the 6th book of the Sunni canon.
Because of those unique additions.
Yes. It certainly wasn't because it was flawlessly authentic. It was because it was indispensable. In the ancient world, utility ultimately trumped perfect authenticity. His wide net gave scholars a massive, diverse pool of unique, legal and ethical precedents to work with that they literally could not find anywhere else.
What's fascinating here is that Ibn Majah never actually claimed that every single hadith in his book was authentic.
No, he didn't.
He didn't hide his sources or try to pass off weak material as ironclad. For every single tradition, he meticulously recorded the isnad, the chain of transmission.
Right, the chain of names.
He essentially said, here is the story, and here is exactly who told it to me, going all the way back. He provided the raw data so that future scholars could do the filtering themselves.
That brings up a critical point about early Islamic scholarship. The isnad was the technology of the day. By providing the chain of names, Ibn Majah was giving future generations the exact cryptographic key needed to verify or debunk the text.
That sounds like a solid defense on paper, but casting that wide of a net inevitably hauls in some serious bycatch.
It certainly does.
Which leads us to the elephant in the room. This canonical book contains hundreds of widely acknowledged weak links. And worse, there are outright fabrications.
Yes, there are.
I've seen the debates online regarding his hometown bias. People point out that there are forged hadiths in this book specifically praising Qazvin, claiming things like, it is a literal gate of paradise.
The numbers back up that concern. Out of the 4,341 hadiths, roughly 1,089 are classified by traditional scholars as weak narrations.
Over 1,000.
Yeah. And over 30 are widely agreed to be outright fabrications. The Qazvin hadiths you mentioned are prime examples. They clearly elevate the status of his specific region in a way that feels politically or socially motivated.
And this is where we really need to look at how different groups interpret the inclusion of these fakes today. From a secular or academic viewpoint, critics and ex-Muslims look at these Qazvin hadiths and see a smoking gun.
They see it as proof of corruption.
Exactly. To them, it is clear evidence of regional bias, political propaganda, and the literal manufacturing of religious texts to serve local interests. They argue that if a compiler is willing to include hometown propaganda, it undermines the credibility of the entire canonical process.
It is a strong critique. However, the traditional Sunni defense counters that by looking at his role as an archivist. They argue that Ibn Majah was not endorsing the Qazvin hadiths. He was documenting the local lore of his region as it existed in his time.
So he was just writing down what people were saying.
Right. And again, the crucial factor for traditionalists is the isnad. Because he attached the chain of transmission to those hometown praises, he handed later critics the exact tools they needed to identify the forgers in that chain and debunk the story.
And later scholars absolutely did that, which blew my mind when I was reading through our sources. The modern scholar Al-Albani didn't just write a critique, he literally, physically split the book into two separate works.
He did.
An authentic volume and a weak volume. That seems wildly disruptive. Imagine taking a millennium-old sacred canonical text and just tearing it in half, effectively telling the global community, this half is usable, this half is garbage.
It was incredibly disruptive. And it highlights a unique dynamic in Sunni scholarship.
Yeah.
The canon is revered, but it is not immune to aggressive, ongoing peer review.
Yeah.
Although Albani's physical splitting of the text was a monumental statement that authenticity must be actively maintained, even at the expense of traditional formatting.
But the Sunni and secular debates are just two pieces of the puzzle. The Shia perspective takes a fundamentally different stance on the entire book, don't they?
They do. Shia scholars completely reject Sunan Ibn Majah as an authoritative source.
Completely.
Completely. Their hadith methodology applies vastly different criteria, and they reject this text primarily due to the inclusion of specific narrators in those chains of transmission whom they consider to have been hostile to the Prophet's family, the Ahlul Bayt.
And we should clarify why that matters. It's not just a historical disagreement, it fundamentally alters the legal landscape. If you throw out an entire canonical text because of the identity of the narrators, you are throwing out all the unique legal precedents inside it. The building blocks of your jurisprudence become entirely different.
Exactly the point. You have one historical text and three vastly different ways of approaching its validity, which profoundly impacts how millions of people derive their religious practice today.
If Ibn Majah was sweeping up everything into his library, it means he captured the highly controversial stuff too.
Oh, absolutely.
I want to transition into some of the specific, highly debated narrations that go viral in modern theological debates. There are some intense taboo questions here regarding science, society, and, well, a goat.
We need to tread carefully here and remember our historical lens. We are analyzing a 9th century archival text through the eyes of modern application. These narrations were recorded in a very specific linguistic and social environment.
Let's start with the one I see constantly brought up in debates between atheists and traditionalists, the Aisha and the goat story. What exactly is the context of this, and where is it in his compilation?
You are referring to Hadith number 1944. It is a startling narration. It claims that after the Prophet's death, physical manuscripts containing verses about stoning and adult breastfeeding were kept under Aisha's bed, and a domestic goat wandered in and literally ate the paper, destroying the verses.
Right. And secularists and critics weaponize this specific hadith to argue that the Quran is demonstrably incomplete, that literal divine verses were permanently lost to a hungry farm animal. How does classical scholarship defend against a text in their own canon claiming the book is missing pages?
The Sunni scholarly defense relies heavily on the concept of naskh, which is theological abrogation. Classical scholars argue that the physical piece of paper may very well have been eaten. That's just a mundane historical accident. But it didn't matter because the specific verses on that paper had already been officially abrogated in their recitation.
Meaning the community had already been instructed that those specific phrases were no longer meant to be recited as part of the formal liturgical Quran.
Precisely. And more importantly, the traditional defense points out that the Quran was not preserved merely on fragile scraps of leather or leaves. It was an overwhelmingly oral culture. The entire text was memorized by thousands of companions.
So it was in their heads.
Yes. So the loss of a physical page in one person's house did not equate to the loss of the revelation. The data was backed up in the minds of the community. Furthermore, it is worth noting that many Hadith scholars classify this specific narration about the goat as anomalous or weak in its transmission anyway.
Let's pivot to another highly debated topic that causes a lot of friction today: the intersection of these texts with modern views on women and patriarchy. There is a specific hadith about prostration that critics highlight as evidence of extreme subjugation in early Islamic texts.
That would be Hadith number 1853. It states that if the Prophet were to command anyone to prostrate to another human being, he would command a woman to prostrate to her husband. It is a very common point of critique regarding patriarchal structures in the ancient world.
When modern readers see the word prostrate, they associate it with literal worship and absolute subjugation. How do traditionalists handle a text that explosive?
Classical scholars approach this through the lens of Arabic linguistics and hyperbole. They point out that the phrasing begins with, "if I were to," which in classical Arabic establishes a conditional impossibility. Prostration in Islamic theology is strictly, unequivocally reserved for God alone.
So nobody bows to anyone else.
Correct. So the classical view is that this extreme imagery, this hyperbole, was used to emphasize the immense gravity, weight, and mutual responsibility of the marital contract. It was never intended as a literal command for women to worship or physically bow to their husbands. Additionally, many modern scholars of Hadith grading actually classified this specific wording as weak, meaning it cannot be used as a binding part of religious creed.
Then there are the scientific critiques. Ibn Majah includes an entire chapter on medicine, and some of the entries raise eyebrows today. There's the famous claim about black seed and another about a fly.
Yes. Hadith number 3448 mentions that black seed is a cure for every disease except death. And there's another well-known tradition stating that if a fly falls into your drink, one wing carries a disease and the other wing carries the cure. Rationalist critics and modern medical professionals often view these as pure 7th century superstition masquerading as divine law.
It is hard to reconcile 7th century folk remedies with modern germ theory. Do traditionalists actually take these literally today?
They contextualize them within the framework of prophetic medicine. Traditionalists argue these were specific remedies suited for the environment and ailments of 7th century Arabia. Regarding the phrase, every disease for the black seed, linguistic scholars classify this as an am maxis.
What does that mean?
It's a general statement with a specific intent. It is a recognized Arabic linguistic device. It implies that black seed is excellent for a wide variety of immune-related issues rather than being a literal modern medical cure-all for everything from leukemia to a shattered femur.
So, what does this all mean? When we look at how the broader Muslim world actually handles these texts today, if a book is officially canonical but is widely known to contain weak transmitters, scientifically debated points, and hyperbolic language, how does a modern jurist actually use it?
It all comes down to rigorous categorization. The authentic and good hadiths within the compilation are actively used to derive legal rulings and establish religious norms. But the weak hadiths, they are sidelined from the legal sphere.
So they don't base laws on them?
No, never. They might be used for personal moral reflection, to inspire good deeds, or to understand the historical context of a specific era, but they are never used to derive binding religious law or establish foundational creed. The system is fundamentally designed to tolerate weak historical narratives for their archival value while strictly filtering them out of actual jurisprudence.
Which perfectly sets up one of the most unexpected aspects of Ibn Majah's compilation. If he was acting as a broad-net archivist, preserving weak hadiths and local lore, what else did he let into the library? Because my notes show a heavy presence of what is called Israeliyat.
Yes, the Israeliyat. This is a fascinating area of study. The term refers to traditions, folklore, and historical narratives that originated from Jewish and Christian sources. As the early Islamic empire expanded, many Jewish and Christian scholars converted to Islam. People like the famous figure Kabul al-Ahbar.
Right.
When they converted, they brought their immense cultural and religious storytelling traditions with them, and those stories eventually seeped into Islamic oral tradition.
It is essentially an interfaith bridge of narratives.
Yeah.
And Ibn Majah has some vivid, almost cinematic examples of this Judeo-Christian lore in his book. I was reading through these, and they are wild. For example, Hadith number 79 tells a story about a literal rock that ran away with Moses' clothes while he was bathing.
Yes, that one.
That story directly parallels narratives found in the Jewish Talmud. And then there's Hadith number 193, which gives this grand, cosmic description of the divine throne being carried by 8 massive mountain goats.
And we also see it in eschatology, the study of the end times. Hadith 4077 specifies that the Antichrist, or the Dajjal, will eventually be defeated at the specific gate of Lod, which is a location with incredibly deep roots in older Jewish apocalyptic literature.
But wait, if this is supposed to be a compilation of Islamic traditions, why did early scholars allow Judeo-Christian folklore to be recorded in their canonical texts at all? Wasn't there a fear of polluting the theology?
There was a deep concern about theological integrity, but they also had an explicit textual permission to engage with this lore. Scholars point to a foundational rule recorded by Bukhari in Hadith number 3461. In it, the Prophet explicitly permitted Muslims to narrate stories from the children of Israel, stating there was no harm in doing so.
Oh, wow.
This directive gave early Islamic scholars the theological green light to absorb, discuss, and preserve the historical and cultural lore of their Abrahamic neighbors.
But they didn't just accept everything blindly. They couldn't just take a Talmudic story and make it Islamic law. There was a filtering system for this specific type of interfaith narrative, right?
Absolutely. Classical scholars developed 3 distinct, highly logical categories to handle the influx of Israeliyat. The first category is called muwafiq. This applies when the Judeo-Christian lore perfectly agrees with the Quran and the authentic Sunnah.
So if it matches, it's good.
Yes, if it aligns, it is fully accepted as corroborating history. The second category is mukhalif. This is the lore that directly contradicts the Quran or core Islamic theology. For example, older stories that attribute major moral sins to prophets like David or Solomon, those narratives are rejected entirely by Islamic scholars.
And the third category. Because a rock running away with Moses' clothes doesn't seem to neatly fit into establishing core theology or contradicting it.
That falls perfectly into the third category, maskut anhu, which roughly translates to that which the revelation is silent upon. It is neutral. The Quran neither confirms nor denies it. The cosmic mountain goats carrying the throne, or the rock running with the clothes, sits squarely in this space.
So what do they do with them?
These stories are permitted to be shared for their storytelling value, for historical interest, or to invoke a sense of awe regarding the unseen world. But, and this is the absolute red line, they can never, ever be used to establish Islamic law or alter core theological creed.
That makes a lot of sense.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we're really observing is that early Islam was not some isolated xenophobic bubble. It was actively engaged in a highly sophisticated, sometimes polemical, but deeply intertwined dialogue with the older Abrahamic traditions that surrounded it. Ibn Majah acted as an archivist who deliberately kept those interfaith archives open.
He preserved the whole narrative texture of the time.
He did. He preserved the narrative texture of the 9th century, showing us exactly how early Muslims visualized the unseen world and interacted with the spiritual heritage of the Jewish and Christian communities. He provided the raw, multicultural data, fully trusting that future scholars would apply those 3 rules to sort it all out.
And that brings us back to you, the listener. You might be wondering why a 9th century text compiled by a traveling scholar in Persia matters to your life today. It matters because Sunan Ibn Majah is fundamentally a masterclass in information theory. It represents the eternal trade-off that we still grapple with every single day. Do you cast a wide net to capture absolutely everything, prioritizing utility, diverse perspectives, and comprehensiveness? Or do you use a strict, ruthless filter to ensure absolute, unquestionable authenticity?
We deal with this tension constantly in the digital age. Think about how you process the endless stream of information on your phone. Do you want open access to every single perspective, even the deeply flawed and controversial ones, so you have the freedom to judge them yourself? Or do you prefer a closed system where you only receive curated, guaranteed facts? Ibn Majah chose the wide net. He chose the messy reality of total information access, trusting the methodology and intellect of future generations to sort the strong signals from the weak noise.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
I want you to think about your own modern information consumption through that exact same lens. Imagine if a future historian, 1,000 years from now, stumbled upon your personal digital archive. They gain access to your saved articles, your browser bookmarks, your social media feeds, the weird threads you went down at 2 a.m.
That's a terrifying thought.
It is. If they analyzed your digital footprint, how would they judge you? Would they judge your entire intellect strictly by the weakest, most controversial, or factually dubious links you ever clicked or saved? Or would they understand the broader utility of your collection? Would they see that you were acting as your own archivist, gathering a wide net of ideas, theories, and perspectives, just trying to make sense of the complex era you lived in?
It totally shifts your perspective. It changes how you view a canonical text that openly contains flaws. Was the inclusion of that weak material a mistake? Or was it a highly deliberate attempt to capture the entire messy spectrum of human thought at that exact moment in time? It is a fascinating question to mull over next time you curate your own feeds. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Sunan Ibn Majah. We hope it gave you a new perspective on how history is archived, heavily debated, and ultimately judged. Keep exploring, keep examining the sources around you, and keep questioning how the information you rely on is actually built. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.